Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. Thank you for joining our weekly live stream to discuss topics related to digital transformation. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys, including the selection and implementation of new enterprise technologies. And today's topic that we're going to cover is third-party support options for existing ERP systems. So we're going to chat about what you can do if you're in a situation where you have an existing ERP system and you're being forced out of your existing maintenance, or if you're just looking for other options. What are those options and what does that look like? How does it work in the world of the enterprise tech space? And I'm going to introduce our guest here in just a moment, who's an expert in the field to help me unpack that topic in a bit more detail. But a couple logistical things before we jump into the topic at hand here today. First of all, this is a live production of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast. So every week we publish a new episode on Wednesday. And by being part of this interview here today, you're part of the live production of that podcast. Once we're done with this here today, we'll edit it, we'll add more content to it, and we'll formally release it as a podcast episode, video and audio podcast episode later this month. So thank you for being part of that. And secondly, the reason we do these shows live is to get your audience questions and topics and comments covered here today. So I encourage you to please drop in the chat any questions you have along the way. I'd love to get questions or comments from you. I've got some questions to start with, but I'd love to hear from you, the audience, as well, more importantly. So speaking of the chat, we are keeping an eye on the chat in all the streams that we're streaming to today. We're streaming to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter X, as well as Instagram. So thanks for being here today, wherever you're watching here. And you can also, wherever you want, add whatever questions or comments you have in the chat. We'll keep an eye on it here today. Speaking of the chat, if you don't mind, just let me know what city and country you're joining from today. I'd love to hear where the global audience and this global independent tech agnostic movement is joining from here today. So please drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from today. I'd love to hear from you. So again, today's topic is third-party support options, maintenance and support options for your existing ERP systems. Joining me here to discuss this topic is Scott Hayes, who's the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Rimini Street. So Scott, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. First time guest on the show, and you and I had a chance to sit down at a conference recently and get to know each other a bit more, and thought it'd be a great follow-up here to have this conversation here today. But before we jump into some of these questions about third-party maintenance and support, can you tell us a little bit about you and your background, as well as Rimini Street, and what you guys do there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do it in that order. So my background is in enterprise software. I've been in it for many, many years. Kind of a crazy story how I got into it, but maybe we'll get into that at another time. But I work with software development companies in the mid-market ERP space as a developer and as a program manager, and then moved into product management and then into product marketing. And I joined Rimini Street about 5 years ago, and it's been a great ride. The company's growing very fast. And to introduce Rimini Street is to say that we really established a new way of the challenging problems that were associated with vendor-driven software support. So it's quite expensive, and it's not known for having the greatest customer experience. So we wanted to solve those two problems. So what third-party support means, really, literally, is that another company outside of the authors of the software, the providers of the software, delivers support for that software on an ongoing basis, and essentially replaces that support that the vendor would have provided, but it is different in a few ways. In some ways, it covers more than the vendors typically cover, and in some ways, it has to replace some of the things that the vendor might have delivered with ongoing maintenance. And if we want to, we can get into some of that. But Rimini Street has grown quite a bit. We were founded in 2005. And we're now a company with over 2,100 employees. We've served over 5,600 clients, and we have a worldwide base of those clients and support engineers that serve our clients on a day in, day out basis. And we're a public company, traded on the NASDAQ, with a revenue stream of about $400 million a year.
So it's a lot of growth in a fairly short period, less than 20 years. So that's impressive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You guys really have been a disruptor to the market as well in that way, as far as creating an alternative. Just out of curiosity, how do and this was not at all on script, so I apologize. I'm already going off script here, but
No problem there.
there's more where this came from. Don't worry. What I was going to ask you though is, how did vendors respond, especially when you guys first started the company? I know you weren't there from the start, but how do vendors in general respond to the idea that now there's a third party support option for clients?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something they welcome, because that is a great revenue stream for the vendors, and it's typically a very good profit stream. I haven't analyzed these numbers in a few years, but historically, what was happening was the vendors were taking in a great deal of revenue from that annual maintenance stream, and just getting into some of the math of it. Typically, back in the day, licenses for ERP and other enterprise software packages were purchased as a perpetual license. So you paid one time for the license, you could use it into perpetuity, and then you paid annually for the software maintenance and support. Doing simple math, if you paid $5 million for your software licenses, then you were typically paying about $1 million, 20%. For the software maintenance. Now that's crept up over the years. Some of the big ones are typically 22% of that perpetual maintenance charge every year. And then there's been increases to that, annual increases based on, consumer price index or other increases. So that amount of money is not small. I mean, basically you repay for the software again in 5 years or so.
Right.
And what we were finding and what the numbers were saying at the time was that vendors were taking that revenue stream and not necessarily investing in support, but rather investing in the next generation of software. So there was a great profit margin that the vendors were taking. And if you just looked at the support equation, so some of the math said it was above 90% gross margin. So there was an opportunity, I think, to say, wait a minute, this software can be supported by outside third party. And so when we entered the market, we really shook it up, as you say, as a disruptor by saying we could do that for 50% of that cost. So if you paid $5 million for the licenses, you were paying $1 million a year for the maintenance and support. We would provide that support for $500,000. So we cut that in half. And that's just the beginning of the savings. And as we get through this discussion, I think we can talk about where some of the other savings come in the day-to-day management of those environments. But that's basically where we came in, was to provide a full package of support with a more engaging, more responsive, more comprehensive model, starting at half the cost of what you were paying the software vendors.
Right. So a lot of potential cost savings there, because like you said, those maintenance numbers have crept up over time. And when you've got that vendor locked sort of situation where you don't have any other options, they can sort of charge you whatever they want. So this is sort of putting some cost pressure and cost savings in the pockets of your customers, I imagine.
It does. And, back to that question of the vendors. So we were taking away that maintenance stream that was highly profitable, which is not something they were particularly happy about. But this is, a perfectly legal, great opportunity. You've seen it in other markets, where you have the opportunity to take your product to anyone who is capable of repairing that product. And that's basically the model that we're using. And it, it gives people options. An alternative is a great way to describe it, Eric.
Sort of like, it kind of reminds me of when you buy a car, say you buy a Toyota, you don't have to take it to the Toyota dealership to get the oil change. You could take it to, Jiffy Lube or, any discount or, any oil change service or whatever the case may be. It's kind of, in some ways, I don't know if I'm oversimplifying, but it seems like that's the sort of option you're providing there.
It is. And that's a really good way of describing it, but it actually goes deeper than that. If you think about it, enterprise software is highly complex. And if you were to just go to a vendor portal or a knowledge base or a chat room somewhere, to try to figure out what's going on with your software, that could be very a frustrating experience, because this software is so complex and it's so highly configurable that what you're running is not exactly like anyone else's, right? And you've probably had this experience. I have, right? I've got something I'm trying to do kind of different in Excel, and so I go out and I see the chat rooms, and I find one and I think, oh, this is exactly what I need to do, and I try to follow the steps. They've got screenshots and everything. Guess what? Even my Excel is set up differently, right? And so at that point, I'm tired of that experience of trying to find my own solution to the problem. And I think I just want to talk to somebody, right?
Right.
And you've had this experience too, where you got a plumbing problem in your home and an electrical problem, and you like talking to your friends, hey, do you know a guy who blah, 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 right? And you just want that expert to talk you through it. I'm tired of looking through random posts and random knowledge bases. And so that's kind of like your local mechanic, right? Do you have your favorite mechanic for this 2018 Toyota? And you'll ask your friends and you'll get a great recommendation. And that's basically what we are. We are that, expert on the phone, opportunity to just talk to somebody and get this thing resolved in a short manner.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes total sense. I want to come back to a couple questions here in just a moment. But first, I want to turn to the audience real quick and thank everyone who's dropping in the chat where you're joining from today. I want to say hello to a few people. Kristen joining on LinkedIn from Denver, Colorado. Thanks for being here today, Kristen. Craig Adams from Hereford, UK, joining us from YouTube. Thank you for being here today from Hereford. And then Sam Graham has been absent for a while, but he's back. He's from Spain. He's a regular listener. So thank you for being here today. And again, any questions you have for Scott and I related to the topic of third-party support and maintenance, I'd love to hear from you along the way. But before I jump into more of these questions, Scott, I can't resist this question. You tempted me to ask it earlier, but you said you had a strange story of how you ended up in this market. Can you tell us how did because I don't know of anyone, who, myself included, I don't know anyone that planned to be in the space from a young age.
Oh, that's interesting. I kind of had, I suppose, a little bit of an aptitude toward it, but I graduated college with a degree in economics and sociology. So money and people, right? Okay, well, I'll go into business. And back then, there were management training programs that were available, and I joined one with a department store retailer. And so I began my career, and that company's been absorbed into the Macy's family now, so anyone would recognize that retail name. Right. So I started as an assistant buyer of women's designer shoes.
Interesting.
A lot I learned of that with economics and sociology.
Right.
And one of my early tasks was to predict what the annual December shoe sale was going to cost us in markdowns. And the typical way that was done, I mean, this was back in 1982, Eric, and there were reams of paper that were delivered every Monday morning to a buyer of all the stock on hand, right? Every style, every color, every store, and to try to come up with what the markdowns were going to cost 8-10 weeks in advance was never very scientific. It was pencil and paper and a calculator, and it took hours and hours. And as I said, I had a bit of a proclivity to some coding, and I'd learned a little bit in college. And my mom was a business education teacher and happened to have an early personal computer at home. This is a TRS-80 Model 3. It's fun to look up. Looks like a machine from a science fiction movie back in the day.
Was that one of those Radio Shack ones, or
what's that?
Is it Radio Shack that made that?
No, Radio Shack. Yeah, Tandy Radio Shack is the TRS. Yeah. So I wrote a program to ingest the all the colors and the styles and the quantities on hand and the sales over the last several weeks, and wrote what today we'd call an algorithm, but basically a predictive formula to say, okay, if that's the way it's gone in the past based on the on-hands and the sales, what are we going to have on hand at the beginning of December when this sale starts, and how much is that markdown going to cost us? And I came back to my buyer on the weekend, and after the weekend, and I said it's going to cost $100,000, and this was in October. We get through the end of the sale in December, and as luck or maybe some logic would have had it, I was off by $700 on 100,000.
Wow.
And I thought, well, there may be something to this. So, but it's not very scalable, me at home with my personal computer. And so, long story short, I actually joined with the IT team to be a beta tester of spreadsheet software running on a mainframe. So
Hmm.
basically introduced spreadsheets to the buying offices of this division of Macy's. And then a few years later, after I kind of finished my run in the merchandising part of the business, was invited to join the programming team, became a programmer for that division. And after that, all IT. But I can say without a doubt, Eric, because I'd been in women's shoes, women's sportswear, and then women's dresses, that I'm the only person on this planet to have a career path that went from buyer of women's dresses to COBOL programmer.
Yeah, that's a very non-traditional, non-linear route that you've taken to get to here, especially looking at what you do now at Rimini Street.
Yeah, yeah.
That's really interesting. Um, well, good. Well, thanks for that background. That is an interesting story, and I've yet to meet that person that says, I knew at a young age I wanted to
Keep
get into
looking.
the enterprise tech space, and I decided
Oh,
to.
right, right.
That's
Which is
interesting,
good because what you bring is something that matters more than the tech itself.
right?
Right. So I still have a real heart for the tech that's available to buyers and planning stocks and making good purchasing decisions. Retail is still there in my blood a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, and understanding how the technology gets used, from the user perspective,
100%.
gives you a different perspective there. Well, good. Well, I want to say hello to Manny from joining us from Perth, Australia on
Yes.
YouTube. Thanks for being here today. And then here's a question that I wanted to ask you. This is from Sam on LinkedIn, and wanted to ask you this question here, Scott, around do the ERP providers continue to provide new functionality, and if not, is that a problem for users? And maybe I'll add to that. Maybe add a little bit to that too. ERP providers, assuming they do continue to provide new functionality, how do third-party support providers fit into that? How
Yeah.
do you guys keep up with some of these new advancements that vendors are coming out with on
Yeah.
the old,
Yeah.
on the call it the legacy systems? I know we're talking about all kinds of systems here, but on
For
those
sure.
systems.
For sure. So, and it really gets to the heart of this model where, yes, you do stop your annual agreement with the software provider for maintenance and support. Therefore, at that point, you no longer have a right to anything new that's delivered from that software provider for that particular suite of applications. Okay. What you do have the rights for is everything that's been delivered up until that point in time. And to be honest, most ERP practitioners aren't on the very latest release. They may be 2, 3 releases back. That could be 4, 5, 7 years back, but it's stable and it's working. And so all these releases have happened, and you're entitled to those releases. So one of the things that we help our clients do is to prepare and store an archive of all of those releases. So upgrades can happen even after joining third-party support, up through that very last release that was released before you left the vendor. So those are all available. Now, then there's a question of, well, yeah, but what about the things that were delivered after you left? Those, of course, are no longer an entitlement of somebody who's come to third-party support. So we have to look at what's happening to the enterprise software space, ERP specifically. And it's during the early 2000s, there was massive growth in these applications. They were really getting feature rich and growing, and there were new exciting features coming with each of the releases. And that slowed a bit. And there was a time in which most of the software providers were then starting to develop a whole new platform, a whole new set of applications with different names and a different license. So there wasn't a direct path. Now there was kind of leaping over and getting to a different product that was really going to be the next move. And fewer enhancements and new features were coming into that software that had been there for a while, right?
Yeah.
So there's this idea that, oh, if I leave the vendor, I've got this fear of missing out. I'm going to miss out on this enhancement or that feature. Well, that's less and less true. In fact, I'm about to publish a a blog post about this called "No More FOMO."
Right.
I don't have to fear missing out because there's not much being delivered anymore for the release that or the product that I'm running. So then the question is, well, yeah, but what if they deliver some features that might be applicable to me? And I underline the word might because it's really up to the vendor to decide what are new features that would go into any product
Right.
if they're indeed still delivering them. And are those exactly the features that you need for your business? That's kind of that's a low probability game. What
Mhm.
we would rather see is an acceleration of innovation that's specific to your business. And so by taking at least 50% of that cost off the table, and it can go up to we've seen some of our clients save up to 90% of total cost of operating and supporting the software. Take that money and direct it toward a prioritized list of innovations that are going to be important specifically to your business. So no
Mhm.
longer waiting for the vendor to decide, oh, we're going to deliver this, that, or that, the other feature. Rather, go and invest in developing exactly what you need. Is it more resiliency in your supply chain? Is it a new e-commerce option to go direct to consumer? Whatever that is that's going to change your business and your competitive advantage, then let's invest there rather than whatever the vendor might have given you in some future release. That's kind of the idea.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense, and it's perfectly reasonable to see that. And I like that, the FOMO comparison there, or the FOMO discussion, because I think there is some truth to that in terms of really focusing on what's right for your business rather than worrying about, are there new capabilities that may not be of value to me, at least not at this point.
Exactly. Focused investment. We can't afford to just, pay for things we don't need.
Yeah. So you talked about these cost savings. You said, up to 50% cost savings, switching over, and we'll come back to some of those where that savings comes from, or
Yeah.
what form those savings come from. But before I get there to that follow-up question, what are some of the most common concerns or misconceptions that companies have about moving to third-party maintenance, and how do you guys address that in the market? So if I come to you and say, "Hey, this all sounds great, but here are my concerns," what are those common concerns that you hear from customers?
Yeah, there were concerns and they were legitimate at the beginning. And so we as a company had to decide how are we going to address those. And the two most important ones were, well, I get security patches from my vendor. So that
Mm.
was number one. And number two, the maintenance releases that the vendor provides include updates for tax, legal, and regulatory compliance, right? Those don't stop, right? The hackers aren't stopping their work and trying to get at your data, and the regulators don't stop in creating, new ways and new mechanisms for requiring regulations inside of your software. So from a very early beginning, we had to provide alternatives to that. Let me take them in reverse order. In the tax, legal, and regulatory area, we have a team, a very large team, that combs the entire body of regulations that are being published by uh, regulatory bodies and legal entities and countries and jurisdictions all around the world. And we have proprietary patent pending systems that go and pull this research and then vet it against what our clients are running.
Mm.
Okay. So if you think about the old vendor model, the vendor would need to basically make all those regulations available to all their customers, whether they were using it or not. At least it's there. And then the customers themselves would need to apply these packs that had the updates in them. And some of them they needed, some of them they didn't. And there's always a challenge when you apply a new release of software that it could bump into something you've got running that might be custom, right? Because the vendors don't need to write for that. And so what we've done with our tax, legal, and regulatory updates is, as I say, we've ingested all of these things from thousands and thousands of sources, and then we vetted against what each client, what products are they running that require tax, legal, and regulatory updates? What versions of those products are they running? And what are the jurisdictions in which this company is obligated to comply with the regulations? And that combination of those three things is what we package up, test in a customer test environment, a client test environment, and make sure that they've got only what they need, all of what they need, and that it works in their environment. And then the client goes and applies that to their production space. So it is a tremendous amount of work. We have about 350 professionals in our tax, legal, and regulatory practice that are doing that analysis, vetting, building, testing, and delivering those specific updates for our clients. So that's the tax, legal, and regulatory one. On the security side of things, so what are you missing out on? You're missing out on security patches that would have been delivered, again, at that point after the time you left the vendor's support. And security patches are one way to help guard against hackers and challenges with security, but they aren't the only way. And so obviously without those patches, we need to be able to help our clients defend against those issues and really mitigate the risks of that security probability, or I should say eventuality rather than probability, don't you think?
Yeah.
And so what we did is created some solutions that don't just address known vulnerabilities, but also address unknown vulnerabilities. Think about it. A patch is exactly that. It's a patch over a particular hole, if you want to simplify it, in the software that has a very specific known vulnerability. And that doesn't mean it's the only one or even the only one of its type. I mean, in the security vernacular, they call that a common vulnerability exposure, or CVE. But there's a concept that's called, I think it's CWE, a common weakness enumeration. It's kind of a class of vulnerabilities. And so what we deliver are solutions that address classes of vulnerability enumerations that give our clients a greater peace of mind in terms of being proactive in their security posture and mitigating not only known vulnerability risks, but unknown vulnerability risks. But that's the effort we had to go to earn the right to be their support provider, even after the vendor was no longer providing those things. So those are the top two reasons why they would say, I'm not sure about this. What's going to happen with security? What's going to happen with tax, legal, and regulatory? And that's how we address them. And then the third one was, yeah, but what about those new releases? And we talked about that again. Fear of missing out is really your perspective on what's important to your business.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I know a lot of what you guys do, or one of the systems you guys focus on and support, is SAP.
Yeah.
And just using SAP as an example of one of the services you provide, or one of the third-party maintenance and support services you provide, a lot of ECC and R3 customers that are using, the existing versions of SAP or the legacy versions of SAP are struggling with, how do we make this transition over to S/4HANA? And by the way, SAP is telling us we have till 2027 to make that transition before they cut off support for ECC and R3. How is that affecting your business? Are you seeing a lot of customers that are coming to you because, hey, we want to have an extended runway for how long we can get support and maintenance for the existing SAP versions, versus feeling like we have to rush to get to S/4HANA by 2027? Or how is that affecting your business model?
Yeah, the SAP market is quite frenzied at the moment because of some of the announcements that SAP leadership has made over time. You mentioned a 2027 expiration date. That's for mainstream maintenance
Mm,
for ECC, what some call SAP ERP, what some call Business Suite.
right.
Um, and that 2027 date at one time was 2025. So there is there's some faction of the SAP customer base that's thinking, oh, maybe they'll extend it again, maybe, just maybe.
You can still
But
tell a
I
little
have
early.
heard SAP leadership double down on this a couple of times, saying this is it, folks. But there's something really interesting here, Eric. The 2027 deadline that was originally 2025 isn't for all ECC customers. It's only for the ones on the latest enhancement packs, enhancement packs 6, 7, and 8, and 8 was the last one that was delivered.
Mm,
If you're on enhancement pack 1 to 5, or what was prior to that, we call it enhancement pack 0, but basically, the first release of ECC 6. So if you're on enhancement pack 0 to 5, your end of mainstream support date is still 2025.
oh, wow.
Check your calendar.
Yeah.
That's like 14 months away,
It's coming up real
right?
soon. Yeah.
It is coming up real soon. And by estimates that we have, there's about 50% of the ECC customer base that is on enhancement pack 0 to 5. So they're facing this 2025 deadline, and SAP hasn't said that there's even an extended support option for them. Their option is called customer specific maintenance.
Mm,
And that's a whole different negotiation and a lower scope and a lower set of SLAs from SAP. And so they're really facing what's going to happen. So as you can imagine, right, we have lots more potential customers out there that are looking for an option to extend and
mm,
go beyond that 2025 deadline. I mean, if you were just to try to start a migration right now for your SAP property, that would be a high risk kind of a project because very few of them are going to be just months.
yeah.
And I don't imagine that too many of those clients running EHP 0 to 5 are going to bother upgrading to EHP 6 to 8. Don't know that there's a whole lot in that for them. Plus, all they're doing is kicking the can down the road, and they're going to face a 2027 deadline anyway.
Right.
So that has put pressure on them. The other thing that's put pressure on them is the next big move is, as you say, to go to S/4HANA. And the way that SAP is selling that now is really only in a cloud subscription. So
Mm,
you're talking about taking this property that you paid, remember our example at the beginning, you paid $5 million for, and you own the licenses. And what SAP is saying is if you want to do S/4HANA through the Rise with SAP program, that you will give up those perpetual licenses and instead you will pay a subscription for the right to run that software and the support that comes with it.
right.
And those numbers are huge. When you add up the cost of the migration and the disruption and the risk to do that migration to S/4HANA.
Mm,
There's one other constituency I want to talk about, and that is about 18,000 existing S/4HANA clients that took on S/4HANA early. So, when S/4HANA was first delivered, I think it was 2015, not sure.
yeah.
There were clients who said, okay, I'm going to go to that technology, and they implemented it, typically what we would call on premises. They kept their perpetual licenses. They implemented on premises. We're talking about thousands and thousands of clients. And SAP has even said to them, we really want you to move to Rise with SAP and our managed cloud and a subscription. And so some of the things that we're doing, the really cool things that we're doing in their mind with new features, including some AI capabilities, some Gen AI capabilities, some sustainability things. They call it Green Ledger. Those enhancements are not going to be made available to those running on-prem.
Mm,
So these clients who said, hey, we're with you, SAP, we're going to go to S/4HANA, they still have perpetual licenses, they're running on premises. We have a lot of those as clients.
interesting.
Why? Because of our model for support. and we can, support them. What we say is, once you come to Rimini Street, we'll support whatever you're running for 15 years, right?
Right.
And so there's no concern about 2025, 2027 deadlines. They can take their time to decide what they're going to do next. Maybe that'll be S4HANA, maybe not. Maybe by then it'll be something completely different. But we take that time pressure off. We buy them um, uh, uh, several years of savings that they can then invest in a migration project if they want. And so that's what's really happened in the market with the deadlines and the high-end premium features are only for those on the Rise with SAP program. It's got a lot of buyers pushing back and saying, I'm not sure that's for us. What we've got is so mature, so customized, so stable. I'm not sure we want to do that thing that you're basically forcing me to do by stopping mainstream maintenance and potentially ending my perpetual license. And so here's an opportunity for us to step in and say, no, it's your roadmap. Control it. You decide what you want to do. We'll be there alongside you, and we'll support the customizations, and you can run it, until it's time to do something else.
Yeah, and even if you do have a little bit of FOMO, like you mentioned before, and I love that topic or that theme of, let's not get too enamored by FOMO, and let's not make irrational decisions based on FOMO. But let's just say I've got a little bit of FOMO and I still think, all right, well, I still feel nervous that SAP or, insert vendor name here is forcing me over to a newer version of the technology. That's okay. Yeah, I mean, you can still go down that path, but it may be that 2027 is not a realistic timeline to get it done.
Yeah,
So this gives you
yeah.
some time to say, well, if it's going to take you till 2028 or 29 or whatever it is, at least now you've got some temporary relief to give you some additional wiggle room or runway to get that done.
Yeah, 100%. So I truly believe that our engagements and discussions with SAP practitioners, it's already increasing. I
Mm.
was looking at the kinds of volume we've seen in those increasing, and I would expect that to increase right through 2027. I think next year is going to be, there's going to be several who are just caught out and are still facing a 2025 deadline, and just have no runway left. And so we're here to help.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's an interesting question that maybe opens up another complete different thread here with you, Scott. But this is from Sam on LinkedIn. He says, "Are there enough experienced S4 HANA consultants out there to hit a 2025 deadline anyway?" And just in general, how are you seeing this whole resource constraint thing affect the market, and how's it affecting your
Well,
business?
yeah, short answer to that is no, there
Yeah,
aren't enough.
right.
And I follow this closely. In fact, we'll be publishing a video podcast on this exact topic, the SAP talent gap and how it's changed this year versus last year. Even the large SIs are recruiting very, very hard for SAP consultants. It's a good time to be an SAP consultant.
Mhm.
If I go back in my own history, right? 1999 was a good time to be a COBOL programmer because of Y2K,
Right.
right? And they were in short supply. Here's the challenge. So anyone who's going to do an ECC to S4HANA migration is going to need people who are familiar with ECC and familiar with S4HANA to make that jump. And that's a very special skill set. And by the way, those people with S4HANA skills are charging a premium. Anywhere from 10 to 20% is what we're hearing that they are expecting for having those SAP S4HANA skills. So any practitioner or customer that wants to do this migration is going to have to attract that talent, recruit, and then afford that talent, which is going to cost more, and then retain that talent through the end of the project. I kind of envision this nightmare scenario where you've got some really highly skilled SAP consultants that started your, let's call it an 18-month project, and 12, 15 months in, there's a desperate company out there that's willing to pay anything and will come and poach and find and hire the way those consultants who are on your project with an offer they just can't refuse.
Right.
And so this challenge of finding, attracting, affording, and retaining talent through the end of that migration effort, I think is going to be tough. It's just one more reason that don't do it now. I mean, none of us could avoid Y2K. It was
Right.
going to happen to all of us.
Right.
But 2027 support deadline doesn't have to happen to anybody.
Yeah. It almost feels like, it's funny you bring up Y2K, because I've always said it kind of feels like when I say we, I'm not talking about you and I, but we as an industry, as a collective industry, we've created and manufactured our newest version of Y2K. Let's create this urgency that we naturally inherently had in the market back in the late 90s. Let's recreate that. Let's replicate that frenzied panic that so many organizations had. Now the vendors are manufacturing it rather than it being more of a technical situation. Right. Although I still do wonder that the cynic conspiracy theorist in me still wonders if Y2K was really a thing. Now I'm wondering.
That's a different podcast altogether, Eric.
Was that really a thing? Did we really need all this panic back then? But that's all. You're right. That is another topic. That would be a fun one, though, to do sometime. So here's a couple comments and questions following up here. We've clearly hit a nerve here on this thread, but this is from Gassan on LinkedIn. He says SAP certifications are on the rise faster than Bitcoin. That's probably true. You're starting to see a lot of people jump into the space, which leads you to wonder, are these qualified resources? Are these the kind of resources you want, the ones that just jump in and get certified right now? Is that who you want to kind of guide you through your transformation?
That's part of the vetting process. I mean, certification is important, and there's training out there, and I've even seen SAP increase the level of training available. But there is so much more to a project than just being certified on the software.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Laik on LinkedIn has a controversial statement here that I enjoy and I actually agree with. So, Laik says, good point about on-prem S4HANA users. These clients feel betrayed and SAP hasn't figured out how to motivate them to move to the cloud. With this cloud-first strategy, SAP risks losing them entirely, as some of these clients may never want to go to the cloud. And God forbid someone doesn't want to go to the cloud and they don't want to do it now. I know that's just not cool to talk about, but how much of the market do you see as being like, hey, this cloud thing is great, that's where we're going, but we're not quite ready. We don't see ourselves doing that anytime soon. So let's look to third-party maintenance and support. How often is that sort of a driver for this model?
Oh, it's very often a driver for our model. We've often used the phrase lean into a business-driven roadmap as opposed to a vendor-dictated roadmap, right? Control your roadmap, own your future. You decide. This is great software. It's really phenomenal software. And as I said, it's likely doing the job. I mean, we kidded about it yesterday in our communications, Eric, about this idea of legacy software. And I said, no. It's not legacy if you're still running it, using it, and it's still productive for your business. It's existing software. And you can keep doing that for years and years. And we encourage our clients to look at what the business really needs. Sometimes there are line of business influencers in the company that are in marketing, in sales, and they say, I need a new CRM solution. There are practitioners in human resources that say, I can't live with what's in this stack of ERP solutions. I need a purpose-built human capital management solution. So that's already happened. People have separated those core business functions out from this monolithic stack of ERP and are putting together more of a composable model. Now, getting back to the cloud issue, there are some who I sometimes hear, we will never go to the cloud for reason XYZ.
Sure.
And what I want to separate here is the deployment from the licensing, because they don't always mean, they aren't always hand in hand. People will often talk about, I don't want to go to the cloud. What they really mean is, I don't want to give up my perpetual licenses and go to subscription. Right? That's a separate thing. We have clients who have moved their implementation of their ERP to the cloud. We call it a lift and shift project. You don't want to be in the data center business. I get that. But that doesn't mean you have to give up your perpetual licenses and move to subscription. No, bring your perpetual licenses with you and redeploy your existing software on AWS, on Azure, on Google. We can help you do that. So now your cloud, I'm out of the data center business. I've got that elastic cloud computing available to me that's going to be a longer runway and a more predictable cost for me in the cloud, but I'm retaining my perpetual licenses. And so many customers will get to the cloud without changing their commercial relationship with the vendor and the software.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I'd never really thought of that. I've always known of the financial implications, obviously, of moving from the perpetual model to subscription model, but I never thought of that necessarily being a form of resistance to the cloud. And it makes total sense. Obviously, that has to be a key driver why companies are resisting the cloud in some ways. And I think a lot of times when we talk about that, we think, well, it's because they just aren't digitally mature enough or technically mature enough or sophisticated enough to move to the cloud. But it could just be purely a financial consideration too, which you have to take into account. Just because it's better for the vendors and they make more money off it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right strategy for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here's a question I want to get to on YouTube. Where was it? Well, first of all, I'll get to this comment. This is from Anthony on LinkedIn. Anthony says it's a similar challenge with Oracle. Cloud is much more expensive than staying with stable legacy ERP platforms. I think that's true. Cloud systems can cost you more in the long term, much like leasing a car generally is going to cost you more
Great
than buying a
example.
car.
Great example.
What about, here's an interesting question. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. This is from Manny on YouTube. Manny says, do you see the imminent upgrade to HANA as an opportunity for customers to explore alternative solutions in the market? So these companies that are using the existing SAP systems, whether it's ECC, R3, or maybe the on-premises version of S4 HANA, do you see how many of those customers do you see saying, hey, if you're going to force us to a migration here, let's just go out and look at Oracle. Let's go look at Microsoft Dynamics and let's go consider our options rather than just going down this sort of forced march of we have to do an upgrade to SAP to another SAP product?
Yeah. I think there's some of that going on. I think that that's going to be on the longer tail, the smaller group that will actually choose to do something else, except for those that I say come to a third-party support solution to buy themselves some time. And with that time, I think they'll have an opportunity to truly explore what those other options are. I don't think we're going to see this, quick switch of customers from SAP or Oracle EBS to an Infor or a Dynamics or an Epicor during this next couple of years. It's too massive of a change. Look, initially SaaS was created for kind of departmental function-specific applications, things that were really easy to deploy. And you just kind of, I need this for a small group of people, 10 users, and I put in my credit card and I use it for a year. And if I have to change, I'll change. There were low barriers to entry, right? Low cost to implementation, and there were low barriers to exit. I could just stop paying, get out and do another one. That's not true for ERP software. That is humongous and it's complex. There are enormous barriers to entry or re-entry. There are enormous barriers to exit, particularly with properties as large and as complex and as customized as SAP and Oracle ERP solutions. So when you say, well, could we make that switch? Yeah, it's going to take some time, and you're really going to have to do some very hard evaluation of the capabilities of that relative to what you have, so that your business doesn't take a step backwards when it's making a switch like that. But it can happen, and we want to invite customers, as I say, it's your roadmap, you control it, you make the decisions, just don't be forced into it by some artificial time boundary.
Yeah. And like you said earlier, control, I can't remember your exact words, but you say control your business or control your roadmap. I mean, it's your business. Decide what you need to decide that fits your business, not necessarily the vendor's business and needs.
Yeah.
What about, here's a question from Darian on LinkedIn, which I love this question. Can you share any success stories where companies were able to delay or avoid costly ERP upgrades by using Rimini Street's services?
Yeah, I mean, it happens, every month because they did come here to do exactly that. And so we have clients who, for example, there's one in in Europe called Green Cargo. And the CIO there is a gentleman by the name of Ingo Pass. And he sat down when he joined the company, he sat down with his CEO, and they had quite a rich array of not only SAP systems, but also other, even mainframe systems that were running their business. And the general thought was, you know what, we just do whatever the vendor does next. That was the kind of the thinking of the CEO. And he sat down and he said, no, I think we need to think about this differently. I think we have to understand exactly what's going to make a difference for our business, for our unique model of sustainable transportation. They have rails in Europe that transport goods. And we need to isolate specific capabilities that need to be addressed, that just staying on the SAP version train isn't necessarily going to get us. And so it's what some people will call a composable ERP. Let me make sure that each part of my business has the software that's right for their part of the business. Now, back 20 years ago, that would have been tremendously difficult to operate because there wasn't this kind of capability to stitch together and do the integration between applications that were running in different languages, different processes, different kinds of server software. But now we have the ability to expose microservices from one application to another. We have great orchestration software tools that are available to make applications and data talk to one another. And in fact, Ingo Pass wrote this book called Digital Composable Enterprises, right? And so it's all about it starts with his conversation with the CEO about, let's do what's important to the business, not necessarily just do what the vendor wants us to do. And that's where it begins, is that conversation with the C-suite. And he made that convincing argument and has developed a team now that's using low-code, no-code solutions. They're exploring AI, and they're doing things that are important to the business. So that's a really good example. But we can turn to several of our clients who have taken that savings and invested in new things that make a difference for their business. And more of them, we're hearing stories like a company in Japan called Nexon that has delivered some new AI capabilities to their users, basically self-funded from their existing budget with the money they've saved with Rimini Street.
That's great. I mean, that's smart use of financial resources and redirecting capital elsewhere and all that good stuff. So for companies that are on the fence, or maybe they haven't heard of third-party support options, they're not familiar with the model. Perhaps this is the first time they're hearing about it, is just through this discussion, which is still true. I still
It's possible. I'm doing my best, Eric.
There's still people out there that don't know this whole model exists, that Rimini Street exists, believe it or not. But let's just say we're kind of new to this idea. Let's just say we've got some people here that might be on the fence about this third-party support options. What advice would you give to sort of get started, as far as just understanding what my options are in terms of how I continue to get maintenance and support for my existing systems?
Well, it's important to look at your current agreements with the vendor. You want to make sure that you're not misusing the software, that you haven't maybe inadvertently started to use more than your licenses would allow you to use. And so that's just an assessment of your existing agreement, your licenses, and your usage. We can help you with that. Actually, part of our practice is a whole organization called Global License Advisory Services. And so we can help you take a look at that and make sure that everything's looking good. And then take a look at your roadmap and talk to your business leaders and say, what's going to be most important for you 12 months from now, 24, 60 months from now, 5 years. And then look at what the vendor's offering. Now, your first thought might be, oh, look at all those cool new features. Surely there's stuff in there for us. Yeah, maybe not. Let's really look closely and then do the mapping of the capabilities that the vendor's offering to what your business leaders said that you need. But then there's a huge huge step in between, because getting from here to there can be extremely expensive, risky, and disruptive. And doing it at this time, if you're SAP trying to find the right, that migration itself could cost several times that initial $5 million investment, right?
Right.
And then the final piece of analysis to do is to look at the ongoing cloud costs. You talk about changing from owning a car to leasing it. The ongoing cloud costs are never going to stop. And in fact, and think about it, with AI in the background, there's a great possibility that your consumption of compute power and storage is going to escalate tremendously.
Mm.
Now, maybe there's a productivity component that, gives you a bit of an ROI on that, but do the math carefully, because you're no longer in control of those future costs. This is another blog post I just published called From TCO to TCC. So TCO, total cost of ownership. If you're no longer an owner,
Yeah.
then do you have control over that? So TCC is total cost control, and that's by the vendor who is running your software, publishes your software, has the subscription license, maybe intermediating the hyperscaler agreement in the case of SAP and their RISE program. There's total cost control by the vendor, and there's no rent control in the land of ERP, right? So
Yeah.
those future costs, you better build in a model that looks at the possibility that could go up year after year.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes total sense. That was going to be my closing question, because that's a great place to leave it. But I have to ask this bonus question because it's such a good
Okay.
one. They came in on LinkedIn. And I think it's worth clarifying as sort of a piggyback to what you were just talking about looking at your options and understanding what your needs and considerations are and what your options are. So this is from Gagan on LinkedIn. Gagan says, can Rimini Street support hybrid environments where some parts of the landscape are still on the older version and others are on the newer version of the ERP?
Yeah. Thanks, Gagan. Good to see you. We are vendor agnostic, technology agnostic, deployment agnostic. So however you've licensed it, and however you've deployed it, we can help take care of it. I'll get into one nuance of that before we end, but so if you choose to run on-prem, literally on your own premises, fine. If you choose to migrate it, lift and shift to a cloud, fine. We can still support it. This is where that question of how are you licensed? Have you paid for the perpetual licenses, and are you paying annual support from the vendor? If that's the case, we can take over that annual support. You don't have to pay the vendor anymore, pay us less, and we'll take care of you. If you've moved a portion of that software, not just to the cloud, but to a subscription arrangement where you're now paying a single subscription fee to the vendor that includes the right to use the software and the support for that software, you're probably not going to want to pay twice for support. I get that. So we have a whole part of our business, a whole practice called managed services, where if you are running a subscription property, and we already do this today for SAP cloud solutions like SuccessFactors and Ariba and Concur and IBP, and Salesforce, right? Kind of the inventor of that whole model. We provide managed services for the day-to-day operations and performance and configuration and security and all of the other aspects of that that need to be done. It's just not actually, doing the break-fix support for the software itself. So that's another service that we offer. And we have clients who have both. We call them Rimini One clients. They have both support from us and they have managed services from us. And some of their deployment is on-prem and some of it's cloud. So it's hybrid, not a problem. We're agnostic to that. And we'll provide whatever services we can to help you get the most out of that software.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's, you're right. Every customer is different, has different technical landscape and architecture that they're using, that sort of thing. So I imagine you're used to seeing a lot of different variations of that technical stack that you can support.
Yeah, 5,600 variations.
Yeah, that's a lot. Now, how do we learn more about Rimini Street? What are the best places to go to learn more about you guys and to connect with you personally?
Yeah. Obviously, our website, riministreet.com. And one of the things to explore there first might be our client success stories.
Hmm.
We have hundreds of them available, and they're available there on the website. And it's generally organized by the different services we offer and the products we support. So that's a great place to start. I'm available on LinkedIn. Scott Hayes, Hays, can be reached there. And so I'm happy to engage. And I have been engaging on LinkedIn with quite a bit of at least the SAP community.
Good. Good deal. Well, thanks for being here today, Scott. Really appreciate it. This is an
Yeah.
interesting topic. It's fascinating to see what options are out there for customers, especially in this area. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure, Eric. Thank you very much.
You bet. And thank you to the audience for being here today. I appreciate all the great questions we got to. I know we didn't get to everything, but appreciate you all being here today and sharing your thoughts and questions here. Again, we're going to edit this. We'll add some additional content to it. We'll release this as a formal podcast episode later this month. Every Wednesday, you can find new episodes of the podcast at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also see all close to 200 past episodes of the show as well. So go to transformationgroundcontrol.com, look at the past episodes, and keep an eye out for this one that'll be released on multiple platforms here in just a few weeks. So thank you all for being here today. Hope you have a great week. We do these live interviews, same time, same place every week. So hope to see you next Tuesday or in an upcoming Tuesday discussion as well.